A woman caught a bobcat taking her groceries, but what it was feeding made her cry. At first, she thought she was in danger, trapped face to face with a wild predator. But when she followed it into the ravine, she uncovered something no one in her small town was prepared to see. What started as a frightening encounter turned into a battle far bigger than her. A fight against lies, power, and a secret that someone would do anything to keep buried, because this bobcat wasn't the real threat. The true danger was hiding much closer to home. What would you do if protecting the innocent meant risking everything, even your life? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape as Clara Hensley pulled into her driveway, the gravel crunching beneath her car's tires. Her modest house sat alone against the backdrop of rust-colored cliffs, a place she'd shared with her husband before his passing 3 years ago. Now it was just her, the quiet, and the memories of a man whose reputation as a dedicated park ranger still echoed through the community. Clara gathered her grocery bags from the trunk, the plastic handles cutting into her fingers as she juggled 5 bags at once. The evening air was cooling rapidly, typical for northern Arizona, and she could smell rain in the distance. Her shoulders ached from a long day at the library, where she'd spent hours reorganizing the local history section. Just need to get these inside, she muttered to herself, a habit she developed in her solitude. The house key jingled in her free hand as she approached the front door. That's when she heard it, a soft rustle in the desert scrub beside her house. Clara froze, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. Years of living near wilderness had taught her to be cautious, but something about the sound made her skin prickle. In a blur of tawny fur and silent grace, a bobcat launched itself from the shadows. Clara gasped, stumbling backward as the wildcat snatched one of her grocery bags, the one containing fresh meat she'd bought for the week. The plastic ripped, and packages of ground beef and chicken tumbled to the ground. With lightning speed, the bobcat grabbed the largest package and disappeared into the growing darkness. Clara's legs trembled as she steadied herself against the house. Her husband would have known exactly what to do in this situation, but Tom wasn't here anymore, and she had to handle this on her own. The reasonable thing would be to go inside and call animal control. Instead, she found herself drawn by an inexplicable urge to understand. This isn't smart, she whispered to herself, but her feet were already moving, leaving the remaining groceries on her porch. Clara followed the bobcat's path toward the ravine that cut through the landscape behind her property. The fading sunlight painted the rocky walls in shades of amber and deep purple. She moved carefully, her practical shoes crunching on loose stones. The bobcat's tracks were clear in patches of sandy soil. It hadn't tried to hide its trail. After about 5 minutes of walking, Clara heard a sound that made her stop short, tiny, mewing cries, barely audible over the evening breeze. Following the sound, she came upon a collapsed wooden structure, half buried in earth and desert vegetation. It had once been a storage shed, probably abandoned decades ago when the property lines were different. Clara crouched behind a large rock, her heart racing as she peered around its edge. The sight before her melted away any fear she'd been holding. The bobcat, now clearly visible in the last rays of sunlight, was a mother. She stood over 3 tiny kittens, their spotted fur still fuzzy with youth. They were thin, their small sides showing ribs as they scrambled toward the meat their mother had brought. Oh, Clara breathed, her hand rising to her throat. The mother bobcat's head snapped up, golden eyes locking onto Clara's position. But instead of aggression, Clara saw something that struck her to her core: desperation. The wildcat's fur was dull, her frame gone. One ear bore an old scar, and her movements, while protective, showed exhaustion. Clara understood then that this wasn't a simple case of a predator causing trouble. This was a mother trying to keep her babies alive. The realization brought unexpected tears to her eyes as she watched the family eat. The mother bobcat didn't retreat, though she kept her gaze fixed on Clara, her body positioned between the human and her kittens. "You're just trying to survive, aren't you?" Clara whispered, careful not to move closer. The mother bobcat's ear twitched at her voice, but she continued to feed her young, who seemed oblivious to the human observer. As Clara watched, she noticed other troubling signs. Empty food wrappers scattered near the den suggested this wasn't the first time the bobcat had been forced to scavenge from humans. Natural prey must be scarce, driving this normally shy creature to take such risks. Tom had always said that when wild animals started approaching human settlements, something was wrong in their habitat. The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Clara knew she needed to head back before it got too dark to navigate safely. As she slowly stood, the mother bobcat tensed but didn't flee. Their eyes met one final time, and Clara felt something shift inside her. A spark of purpose she hadn't experienced since Tom's death. This wasn't just about a chance encounter with a wild animal. This was about a mother fighting against odds to protect her family. About survival in a world that was becoming increasingly hostile to wild things. As Clara made her way back home in the gathering darkness, she couldn't shake the image of those hungry kittens and their protective mother. The grocery bags still sat where she'd left them on the porch, a reminder of how quickly an ordinary evening had transformed into something extraordinary. As she gathered them up, Clara's mind was already turning over possibilities, wondering what could have driven these animals to such desperate measures. Tom would have known what to do, but maybe, just maybe, she could figure it out too. Inside her house, Clara put away her remaining groceries with methodical care, but her thoughts remained with the Bobcat family in the ravine. The encounter had awakened something in her, a feeling that had been dormant since losing Tom. She understood now that witnessing the small family's struggle for survival would change more than just her evening routine. It would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. A rustling sound caught her attention, followed by a swift, tiny blur. Before Clara could react, a powerful bobcat leaped from the shadows, snatching one of her grocery bags with startling precision. The plastic tore easily, spilling a package of ground beef onto the dusty ground. In one fluid motion, the cat grabbed the meat and disappeared into the growing darkness. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the bobcat vanish into the ravine behind her property. Instead of the paralyzing fear she expected, a different emotion took hold. Curiosity mixed with concern. The cat's movements hadn't seemed aggressive. They had seemed desperate, setting her remaining groceries on the porch. Clara followed the bobcat's path at a safe distance. The ravine's walls rose around her as she carefully picked her way down the rocky slope. The setting sun painted the sandstone in deep oranges and purples, creating shadows that seemed to move and breathe. A soft mewing sound stopped her in her tracks. There, in the remains of an old collapsed maintenance shed, she saw something that made her breath catch. The bobcat, now clearly visible as a mother, was tearing the meat into small pieces, feeding 3 tiny kittens. Their ribs showed through their spotted fur, their small bodies trembling as they eagerly accepted the food. "Oh my," Clara whispered, her hand rising to her mouth. These weren't dangerous predators, they were starving. The next morning, Clara couldn't shake the image of those hungry kittens from her mind. During her lunch break, she returned to the ravine, keeping her distance, but watching as the mother bobcat nursed her young. The scene stirred something in her that had been dormant since her husband's passing. A desire to protect, to speak up. Word of her encounter spread quickly through the small town. By afternoon, several patrons at the library approached her desk with concerned expressions. "Did you really get attacked by a wild bobcat?" Mrs. Peterson asked, clutching her library card tightly. No, Clara explained, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. "It was just hungry. The mother has kittens to feed." But before she could finish, Harold Sutter's imposing figure appeared at the circulation desk. His expensive Western-style suit seemed out of place among the well-worn books, and his gold watch caught the fluorescent lighting as he leaned forward. "Now, Clara," he said, his voice carrying that familiar smooth charm that had convinced so many in town to sell their land to his development company. "We can't have dangerous predators threatening our community. This is exactly why I've been saying we need to develop that ravine. Replace it with something safe and profitable, luxury. Cabins with a view. Cabins with a view." Clara straightened her spine. "Mr. Sutter, they're not dangerous. The mother is just trying to please," he interrupted, addressing the small crowd that had gathered. "Let's trust someone who knows about these things. Wild animals are unpredictable. Next time, it could be a child they attack." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Clara watched as Harold worked the room, shaking hands and nodding sympathetically at concerned parents. His voice carried across the library as he outlined his vision for the ravine: exclusive properties, increased tax revenue for the town, safety for all. "My development team already has the permits ready," he announced. "We just need the town council's final approval, and we can remove this threat once and for all." Clara felt her isolation growing as former friends and neighbors nodded along with Harold's words. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had been bringing her homemade cookies since Clara's husband died, seemed convinced. "But what about the wildlife?" Clara asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "That ravine has been their home for generations." Harold's smile didn't reach his eyes as he turned to her. "Now, Clara, I know you're still adjusting to life without your husband. Rangers like him had their place, but times change. We need to think about progress, about the future." The dismissive pat he gave her hand felt like an insult, But the worst part was seeing heads nod. In agreement, these people had known her for years, had respected her husband's dedication to conservation. Yet now they treated her concerns as the emotional ramblings of a widow. That evening, Clara stood on her back porch, watching the sun set over the ravine. The mother bobcat emerged briefly, scanning the area before disappearing back into the shadows to her kittens. Clara thought about Harold's words, about how easily he twisted her encounter to serve his purposes. "I won't let them do this to you," she whispered toward the ravine. In the growing darkness, she could almost imagine her husband standing beside her, nodding in approval. He had always said that sometimes the quietest voices needed to speak, the loudest for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The bobcat mother appeared again, her golden eyes reflecting the last light of day. For a moment, their gazes met across the distance, two mothers of sorts, one protecting her living children, the other protecting her husband's legacy of conservation. In that moment, Clara felt her resolve strengthen. Harold Sutter might have the town's ear now, but she had something he didn't: the truth about what was really happening in the ravine. Clara's morning began like any other, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across her modest garden. But something felt different, wrong. Her trained eye caught the subtle disturbances immediately: trampled tomato plants, crushed pepper stems, and boot prints that didn't belong to her scattered through the soft soil. She knelt down, touching the damaged leaves with trembling fingers. These weren't animal tracks. The destruction was deliberate, methodical. Her stomach churned as she noticed a crumpled piece of paper partially buried in the dirt. Unfolding it revealed a crudely drawn picture of a dead cat. "This isn't about the bobcat anymore," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. The message was clear, a warning wrapped in casual vandalism. Throughout the day, more signs appeared. Two men in a dusty pickup truck drove past her house 3 times, moving slowly, watching. They wore matching work shirts with Sutter Development emblazoned on the breast pockets. When Clara stepped onto her porch, they didn't even pretend not to stare. That evening, she discovered deep claw marks carved into her wooden porch railing. They looked fresh, but something about them seemed off, too precise, too perfectly placed to be visible from the road. Clara ran her fingers along the grooves, remembering how her husband Tom would examine animal signs in the park. "Nature's messy," he used to say. "When things looked perfect, start asking questions." The marks haunted her. Were they real or planted? Was the bobcat mother actually coming this close to her house? Or was this another of Harold's tactics? The uncertainty gnawed at her until she couldn't stand it anymore. Clara marched to the garage and pulled out the heavy cases containing Tom's old photography equipment. The cameras had gathered dust since his passing, but they still worked perfectly. She spent hours setting up motion-triggered cameras around her property and along the ravine's edge, just as Tom had taught her during his wildlife surveys. "I need proof," she muttered, adjusting the final camera. One way or another. The next morning, Clara reviewed the footage with shaking hands. The first few clips showed nothing unusual: wind-blown bushes, a few desert mice. Then she saw it, the bobcat mother, moving with ghostly grace through the pre-dawn light. But she wasn't aggressive or threatening. She looked thin, cautious, clearly avoiding Clara's house entirely. "I knew it," Clara whispered. "Those marks were fake." Encouraged, she expanded her surveillance deeper into the ravine each day. She moved the cameras to new locations, building a detailed record of the area's wildlife. The bobcat family appeared regularly, the mother teaching her kittens to hunt, showing them safe drinking spots, protecting them from coyotes. On the 4th day, while reviewing footage from a camera placed high on the ravine wall, Clara nearly dropped her coffee mug. There, perfectly framed against the dawn sky, was an enormous bird landing in a well-hidden nest. She zoomed in, her heart racing. The distinctive white head and dark body were unmistakable. A desert eagle, one of the rarest birds in the region. "Oh my God," she breathed, rewinding the footage again and again. The nest was huge, clearly established. This wasn't just a passing bird. This was a permanent resident. Clara's hands trembled as she dug through Tom's old ranger manuals. There it was. In black and white, desert eagles were a protected species. Their nesting sites were automatically considered protected habitats. No construction could occur within a 1-mile radius of an active nest. The discovery filled her with equal parts hope and dread. This could stop Harold's development plans completely, legally, officially, permanently. But it also meant she was sitting on information that could cost him millions of dollars. As if to confirm her fears, the truck appeared again that afternoon. This time it stopped in front of her house. The men inside stared at her for a long moment before slowly driving away. The message was clear. They were watching, waiting, ready to stop any threat to their plans. Clara carefully backed up the Eagle footage to multiple drives, hiding them in different locations around her house. She kept one copy in Tom's old lock box, another behind loose baseboards in the garage, and a third in a hollowed-out book in her library. The original memory cards she sealed in waterproof containers and buried in her garden, marking the spots with distinctive plants. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing more footage, Clara heard engines approaching, multiple vehicles. By the sound of it, she quickly turned off all the lights and peered through her curtains. 3 trucks circled her property slowly, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. Clara clutched Tom's old Ranger badge, which she kept on a chain around her neck. The metal was warm from her skin, familiar and comforting. "What would you do, Tom?" she whispered. "How do I protect them all? The Bobcats, the Eagles, myself." The trucks eventually left, but their message lingered in the darkness. This wasn't just about a mother Bobcat anymore. It wasn't even just about Harold's development plans. This was about the ravine itself, every creature that called it home, every delicate balance that kept it alive. Clara had stumbled onto something bigger than herself, and now she had to decide what to do with that knowledge. She stayed up late into the night, reviewing footage and making detailed notes. The Bobcat mother appeared again, leading her kittens through their nightly hunting lessons. Above them, barely visible in the infrared camera's glow, the desert eagle soared silently through the darkness, protecting its own family in the shadows of the ravine. Clara's heart raced as she organized her photographs on the kitchen table. The eagle's nest shots were clear and unmistakable, proof that the ravine deserved protected status. She carefully placed each image in a manila folder, along with detailed notes about dates and locations. Her late husband's old camera equipment had served her well, capturing not just the majestic birds but also the Bobcat family going about their daily routines. She needed to present this evidence to the town council, but first, she had to run a quick errand into town for supplies. Clara secured the folder in her desk drawer and headed out, double-checking that she'd locked the front door behind her. 2 hours later, she returned to find her front door standing wide open. The sight stopped her cold. Her grocery bag slipped from nerveless fingers, cans rolling across the gravel driveway. The screen door banged softly in the afternoon breeze, its mesh torn and flapping. Clara's hands trembled as she approached her violated home. Inside, destruction greeted her. Picture frames lay shattered on the floor, their precious photos of her late husband torn to pieces. Books had been pulled from shelves and thrown across rooms. Kitchen drawers hung open, their contents scattered like fallen leaves. The air still held the acrid scent of cigarette smoke. Whoever had done this hadn't left long ago. No, Clara whispered, rushing to her desk. The drawer had been pried open, wood splintered around the lock. Her folder was gone, all her careful documentation vanished. On the desk surface, someone had carved crude words into the wood. "Back off." Tears burned in her eyes as she surveyed the damage. Family heirlooms lay broken. Photo albums were ripped apart, and even her gardening equipment had been destroyed. This wasn't just theft. It was a message, meant to frighten and humiliate her. With shaking hands, Clara called her brother-in-law Royce. Within 20 minutes, his truck kicked up dust in her driveway. He strode in, his weathered face darkening. At the sight of the destruction, "This has gone too far," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Harold's behind this. He's trying to silence me about the ravine." Royce ran a hand through his graying hair, examining the damaged door frame. "Clara, you can't know for sure it was Harold. And even if it was, he's got half the county in his pocket. What can you do against someone like that? So I should just give up." Clara's voice cracked. "Let him destroy the ravine. Let him kill those animals." "I'm saying be practical," Royce replied, his tone gentler but still doubting. "Harold Sutter's been running things around here for 20 years. Folks who cross him tend to lose everything. I don't want that happening to you." Clara touched a torn photo of her husband, his ranger uniform crisp and proud. "I've already lost everything once," she said quietly, "but I won't lose my self-respect." "John would have fought this. John was a trained ranger with the law behind him," Royce argued. You're just what?" Clara's eyes flashed. "Just a librarian. Just a widow. Is that all you see when you look at me, Royce?" He had the grace to look ashamed, but his doubt remained clear in his stance, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'm just trying to protect you," he said finally. "Like my brother would have wanted." Clara straightened her shoulders. "John would have wanted me to stand up for what's right, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." After Royce left, promising to return tomorrow to help clean up, Clara sat amid the wreckage of her home. The violation felt deeply personal, every broken item, Every torn photo was a deliberate attack on her memories, her peace of mind. Her hands shook as she began picking up pieces of her shattered life, but as she worked, something hardened inside her. The fear remained, but underneath it grew steely determination. Harold might have stolen her evidence, but he couldn't steal her resolve. She would start over, document everything again, gather new proof. She would not be silenced. The setting sun cast long shadows through her windows as Clara continued cleaning, each broken item she touched reinforcing her commitment. Harold had made this personal, thinking to break her spirit. Instead, he had only proved how far he would go, and how important it was to stop him. She paused by the window, looking out toward the ravine where the Bobcat family made their home. Somewhere in those shadows, a mother fought to protect her children. Clara understood that fight now more than ever. This wasn't just about saving wildlife anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could crush anyone in their path. As darkness fell, Clara made a silent promise to herself and to the memory of her husband. She would not back down. She would not be afraid. Whatever came next, she would face it with the quiet strength she had always possessed but rarely needed to show. Harold Sutter had just made the biggest mistake of his campaign. He had given Clara nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Inside, destruction greeted her. Picture frames lay shattered on the floor, their precious photos of her late husband torn and scattered like fallen leaves. Her desk drawers had been yanked out and emptied, their contents strewn across the room. The folder containing her legal documentation was gone. Clara sank to her knees among the wreckage, picking up a crumpled photo of Tom in his ranger uniform. Her hands shook as she tried to smooth out the creases. A piece of paper had been left prominently on her ransacked desk, a crude drawing of a bobcat with X's for eyes. The message was clear: back off. She called the sheriff, but his cursory investigation felt half-hearted. Probably just kids, he said with a shrug that suggested he knew better. Lock your doors next time. The dismissal stung, but it wasn't surprising. Harold's influence ran deep in this town. That evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the mess she hadn't had the heart to clean up yet. She pulled out Tom's old ranger logbooks, the few things the intruders hadn't touched. As she flipped through the familiar pages, seeking comfort in her late husband's neat handwriting, something caught her eye. Tom had meticulously mapped the ravine's water sources, springs, seasonal streams, and wildlife drinking spots. She compared his maps to her recent observations. The Bobcat family had been desperate enough to raid human settlements, something highly unusual for the normally shy creatures. According to Tom's notes, there should have been plenty of natural water sources to sustain them. Clara grabbed her coat and flashlight. Despite the growing darkness, she had to check something. Following Tom's map, she located the main spring that fed the ravine. The water trickled weakly, and an odd chemical smell hung in the air. Something glinted in her flashlight beam, empty containers half buried in the dirt. She carefully extracted one, her stomach turning as she read the label: industrial-grade pesticide. Back home, she began piecing together conversations she'd overheard in town. Harold's men bragging about taking care of the varmint problem. The timing of wildlife incidents increasing just as Harold announced his development plans. The way he'd so quickly seized on her Bobcat encounter as justification for clearing the land. It hadn't been a random encounter at all. The Bobcat mother hadn't turned desperate by chance. She'd been forced into it. Harold had systematically poisoned the natural water sources, driving wildlife toward human settlements. He'd manufactured a crisis to serve his purposes, deliberately destroying the delicate ecosystem Tom had worked so hard to protect. Clara felt sick. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was calculated destruction, a dismantling of everything her husband had stood for. She thought of the Bobcat mother, forced to risk her life and her kitten's safety because someone had poisoned their water. The parallel to her own situation, being driven to desperate measures by Harold's cruelty, wasn't lost on her. She spread Tom's maps across the table, marking the locations of every water source. The pattern was clear. Each poison spring corresponded with increased wildlife sightings near town. Harold hadn't just seen an opportunity, he created one. Regardless of the cost to the animals or the environment, the violation of her home took on new meaning now. It wasn't just intimidation. It was part of a larger pattern of destruction. Harold was willing to poison the land, threaten wildlife, and terrorize people to get what he wanted. The realization strengthened Clara's resolve. This wasn't just about protecting a few animals anymore. It was about standing up to someone who would destroy anything in his path for profit. She carefully gathered what remained of her evidence, adding Tom's maps and her new discoveries about the poisoned springs. The proof of Harold's scheme might have been circumstantial, but it painted a damning picture. Clara tucked everything into a new folder, this time hiding it outside her house where it couldn't be found. The sun had set completely now, and through her window, she could see the ravine silhouetted against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, a mother bobcat was struggling to feed her kittens because someone had poisoned their water. Clara touched the torn photo of Tom in his ranger uniform, remembering his dedication to preserving this land. "I won't let them destroy what you protected," she whispered to his image. The truth about Harold's schemes had changed everything. This wasn't just about stopping a development project. It was about exposing a deliberate campaign of destruction. Clara knew the fight ahead would be harder than ever, but now she understood exactly what she was fighting for. Clara sat at her kitchen table the next morning, her hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee. The morning sun streamed through the window, highlighting the lingering mess from the break-in. Her shoulders felt heavy with exhaustion and defeat. A knock at the door made her jump. She approached cautiously, relief washing over her when she saw Royce's weathered face through the window. Her brother-in-law stood on the porch, his expression troubled as he took in the damage visible through the open door. "I heard what happened," Royce said, stepping inside. His work boots left dusty prints on the floor as he surveyed the destruction. "I was wrong, Clara. I should have listened sooner." Clara watched him pick up a fallen photo of his brother, her late husband Tom, from the floor. Royce's fingers traced the edge of the frame, his jaw tightening. "Tom wouldn't have stood for this," he said quietly. "And neither should we." "We?" Clara asked, hardly daring to hope. Royce nodded firmly. This land, these animals, protecting them was everything to Tom. "Harold's not just threatening some bobcats anymore. He's attacking my brother's legacy." He placed the photo carefully back on the shelf. "I'm with you now. Whatever you need." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes as she hugged her brother-in-law. For the first time since the break-in, she felt a spark of hope. Later that afternoon, while Clara and Royce were discussing strategy at her kitchen table, another unexpected visitor arrived. A young woman in a trainee ranger uniform stood nervously on the porch. "Mrs. Hensley, I'm Sarah Martinez, a ranger trainee at the park." She twisted her hat in her hands. "I've been following what's happening with the ravine. The senior rangers won't touch it. They're all afraid of crossing Harold Sutter. But I remember your husband. He trained some of my mentors, taught them what it really means to protect our wilderness." Clara invited her inside, and Sarah's eyes grew wide at the remaining evidence of the break-in. "This is wrong," she said firmly. "I may only be a trainee, but I want to help. I have access to equipment, wildlife cameras, water testing kits. We could gather real evidence of what Harold's doing." Royce leaned forward, interested. "That could be exactly what we need, but it's dangerous. Harold's already shown he's willing to get violent." Sarah lifted her chin. "I know, but sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it's scary." That's what Ranger Hensley always taught his trainees. Clara felt a warm surge of pride at how her husband's influence lived on. She gestured for Sarah to join them at the table. "All right then, let's make a plan." Over the next hour, they mapped out their strategy. Sarah would help them place wildlife cameras in strategic locations around the ravine, focusing on the water sources Clara suspected were poisoned. Royce would use his connections with other ranchers to track Harold's movements and gather information about his operation. "We'll need to be careful," Clara cautioned. "Harold has eyes everywhere." "That's why we'll work at night," Royce said. "I know these lands like the back of my hand. We can move without being seen." Sarah spread out a map of the ravine. "These are the main water sources. If we can catch Harold or his men tampering with them, that's federal evidence. Water pollution is a serious offense." Clara felt a new energy coursing through her veins. She was no longer the quiet widow, easily dismissed and ignored. With her small but dedicated team, she had a real chance of stopping Harold's destruction. They worked late into the evening, planning their surveillance operation. Sarah would bring the equipment tomorrow night, and they would begin their documentation. Royce knew the perfect hiding spots for the cameras, places where Harold's men wouldn't think to look. As her allies prepared to leave, Clara walked them to the door. "Thank you both," she said softly. "I was starting to think I was fighting alone." Royce squeezed her shoulder. "Your family, Clara, and family stands together." Sarah smiled, adjusting her ranger hat. "Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, but that's exactly why we have to do it." After they left, Clara stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the ravine in shades of gold and purple. The sound of distant coyotes echoed through the cooling air, and somewhere out there, she knew, a mother bobcat was hunting for her kittens. She thought of Tom, of his unwavering dedication to protecting this wild place. Now, with Royce and Sarah by her side, She felt stronger than ever in her resolve to continue his work. Harold Sutter might have money and influence, but Clara had something more powerful: people who believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, they would begin gathering their evidence. It would be dangerous, but Clara was no longer afraid. She had found her courage, and more importantly, she had found her allies. Together, they would protect the ravine and all the creatures who called it home. The evening breeze carried the scent of sage and juniper, and Clara breathed it in deeply. She was no longer just Tom's widow. She was becoming a leader in her own right, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "I know someone else who wants to help," Royce said, pulling out his phone. "Remember Julie Martinez? She's training to be a park ranger now." 20 minutes later, a young woman in a trainee ranger uniform arrived at Clara's door. Julie's dark eyes sparkled with determination as she stepped inside. "Mrs. Hensley, I've been watching Mr. Sutter's activities for weeks. Something's not right with how the wildlife's behaving." The three of them gathered around Clara's kitchen table, planning late into the afternoon. As darkness fell, they prepared for their mission. Clara pulled on dark clothes and comfortable hiking boots, her heart pounding with nervous energy. Royce brought night vision equipment from his hunting gear, while Julie contributed her knowledge of the ravine's hidden paths. "They usually come after midnight," Julie whispered as they crouched behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the ravine. "That's when I've heard their trucks." The desert night was cool and clear. Stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. Clara checked her camera settings for the 100th time, making sure the low-light lens was properly attached. Beside her, Royce adjusted his binoculars, scanning the ridgeline. Hours passed in tense silence. Clara's legs cramped from staying still, but she didn't dare move. Just when she thought they might have chosen the wrong night, Julie grabbed her arm. "Listen." She breathed out. The low rumble of engines echoed through the canyon. The pickup trucks appeared, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Clara started recording as three men climbed out, carrying large containers. Through her camera's viewfinder, she watched them approach the natural spring that fed the ravine. "Got you," Clara whispered, zooming in as one man unscrewed a container's lid. The liquid they poured had an unnatural blue sheen in the moonlight. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across their hiding spot. "Hey," a harsh voice shouted. "Someone's up there. Run," Royce hissed, shoving Clara toward the narrow trail behind them. They scattered in different directions as footsteps pounded up the slope. Clara's lungs burned as she ran, clutching her camera to her chest. Branches whipped at her face in the darkness. Behind her, she heard men cursing and crashing through the brush. A flashlight beam danced wildly across the rocks ahead. She'd have behind a boulder. Pressing herself against the cold stone, heavy footsteps approached. Clara held her breath, her heart hammering so loud she feared it would give her away. "Where'd she go?" A voice growled nearby. "Boss wants that camera." Clara inched around the boulder as the footsteps moved past. She had to get to the main trail. If she could just make it to her truck. A root caught her foot. She stumbled, catching herself against a tree trunk, but her elbow knocked loose. Cascade of small rocks. The sound echoed in the quiet canyon. There, she ran flat out now, abandoning stealth for speed. The main trail was just ahead, a pale strip in the darkness. Behind her, the pursuit grew closer. A hand grabbed at her jacket. She jerked away, feeling fabric tear. Clara burst onto the trail and sprinted toward where they'd parked. Her truck appeared in the darkness, a familiar shadow. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking as she unlocked the door and dove inside. The engine roared to life. In her rearview mirror, she saw figures emerging from the brush, but she was already pulling away. Tires spinning on the gravel. 10 minutes later, she met Royce and Julie at their predetermined spot, a 24-hour diner on the highway. They huddled in a back booth, all of them dusty and breathing hard. Clara's arms were scratched, her jacket torn, but she managed a shaky smile as she set her camera on the table. "We got it," she said. Clear footage of them poisoning the spring. Julie squeezed her hand. "You were so brave, Mrs. Hensley. But this isn't over. Mr. Sutter has friends in the county office. They might try to bury this." Royce nodded grimly. "She's right. We've got evidence now. But Harold's got money and influence. He'll fight dirty to protect himself." Clara touched her torn jacket, feeling the bruises forming underneath. The night's chase had shown her exactly how far Harold would go. But something had changed inside her during that desperate run through the darkness. Fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a stronger feeling, determination. "Then we'll have to fight smarter," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "We're not giving up." They spent the next hour copying the footage to multiple devices, making sure their evidence couldn't be destroyed as easily as Clara's previous research. As dawn approached, they finally separated. each heading home by different routes to avoid being followed. Clara's hands shook slightly as she unlocked her front door, but her spine was straight. The night's events had proven something, not just to her allies, but to herself. She wasn't just Tom's widow anymore, living quietly in his shadow. She was becoming someone new, a protector in her own right, ready to stand up against the darkness that threatened her home. Clara stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of pink and gold. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil in her heart. Her phone buzzed on the counter, another legal notice from Harold Sutter's attorneys. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Notice of eminent domain proceedings. The message read. Clara's stomach dropped. Harold was trying to force her off her land entirely. She made herself a cup of coffee, trying to steady her nerves. The morning news played quietly on her small kitchen radio. The announcer's voice cut through her thoughts. Local developer Harold Sutter has filed emergency proceedings regarding dangerous wildlife conditions in the Pioneer Ridge area. County commissioners will review the case next week. Clara's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. This was more than just attacking her now. Harold was moving to destroy everything. The phone rang again. This time it was Royce. Clara, you need to see this. Can you meet me at the ravine overlook? 20 minutes later, Clara pulled up in her dusty pickup truck. Royce stood at the edge of the cliff, pointing toward the valley below. Several large trucks were unloading equipment, but not construction equipment. These were industrial burning units, the kind used for controlled burns. He's going to burn it all, Royce said, his voice tight with anger. Create a controlled fire to clear the brush and drive out the wildlife. Once it's done, there won't be any evidence left of what he did to the water sources. Clara felt sick. The Bobcat family, the eagle's nest, all the desert creatures that called this place home, they wouldn't survive a massive fire. And neither would the proof of Harold's crimes. When, she asked, word is he's waiting for the perfect conditions. Hot day, light wind. Could be any time in the next week. Clara drove home in a daze, her mind racing. As she pulled into her driveway, a sleek black SUV was waiting. Harold Sutter himself stepped out, wearing an expensive Western-style suit that seemed to mock the authentic ranching heritage of the area. Mrs. Hensley, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. I thought we should talk, neighbor to neighbor. Clara's hands gripped her steering wheel. There's nothing to talk about. Harold, I know what you're planning. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Progress is inevitable. Clara, why fight it? I'm prepared to offer you a very generous relocation package. More than fair market value for your property. This isn't about money, Clara said, finding strength in her voice. This is about right and wrong. About protecting what can't protect itself. Harold's facade cracked slightly, revealing the steel beneath. Don't be foolish. You're just one person, a widow living, alone, holding onto the past. Don't force me to make this uglier than it needs to be. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to help you, he said, straightening his bolo tie. But if you insist on standing in the way of progress, well, accidents happen in the wilderness, especially during controlled burns. He turned and walked back to his SUV, leaving Clara shaking with both fear and rage. The threat was clear. Back down or face the consequences. Inside her house, Clara paced restlessly. Her eyes fell on a photo of her late husband in his ranger uniform, standing proud in front of the very ravine Harold planned to destroy. What would he do in this situation? She knew the answer. He would fight, not with violence or threats, but with truth and determination, just like the day he'd stood up against illegal hunters, or when he'd protected endangered species against corporate interest. Clara called Royce and Julie. They needed to act fast. As they gathered in her living room, she laid out what she learned. He's not just planning to burn the evidence, Julie said, her ranger training kicking in. A fire that size will devastate the entire ecosystem. Species that have lived here for generations will be wiped out, and once it's gone, there's nothing stopping his development, Royce added. The land will be cleared, the wildlife driven away or killed, and any proof of his illegal activities will be ash. Clara stood up, her decision made. Then we have to stop him before he can start the fire. We need to gather every bit of evidence we can and get it to the authorities. Who can't be bought off? State Environmental Protection, Julie suggested, and Federal Wildlife Services. They're beyond his influence. But we have to move fast, Royce warned. Once those burning units are in position, it'll be too late. Clara nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her land anymore. It wasn't even just about the Bobcat family that had started it all. This was about standing up to the kind of corruption that would destroy anything for profit. We start tonight, she said firmly. Julie, can you get access to the official wildfire prevention plans? Harold will have had to file them. I can try. As a trainee, I have limited access, but I know where to look. Royce, we need your old surveying equipment. If we can prove he's positioning those burners outside of approved zones. They worked late into the night, gathering documents, making calls to trusted contacts, and preparing for what they all knew would be the final confrontation with Harold Sutter. Clara felt the constant shadow of threat hanging over them, knowing that Harold's men were probably watching her every move, but she wouldn't back down. Not now. Not with so much at stake. As she watched Royce and Julie leave that night, she thought about the Bobcat mother, fighting to protect her kittens against impossible odds. Sometimes, Clara realized, the quietest souls had to roar the loudest. She walked to her back porch and looked out at the ravine, dark and peaceful under the stars. Tomorrow would bring another battle, but for now, she drew strength from the land itself, the land her husband had loved, the land she had learned to fight for. Harold Sutter might have money and power on his side, but Clara had something stronger, the fierce determination to protect what was right, no matter the cost. The first flickers of orange light painted the evening sky, and Clara's heart stopped as she saw smoke rising from the ravine. Harold had made his move. The dry brush caught quickly, flames leaping from branch to branch as the controlled burn rapidly spiraled into an inferno. No, Clara whispered, fumbling for her phone to call emergency services. The fire was spreading faster than she'd imagined possible, feeding on months of drought-parched vegetation. Through the thickening smoke, she could see the old shed where the Bobcat family had made their home. The thought of those helpless kittens trapped inside drove her forward. Without hesitation, Clara ran toward the ravine, her feet carrying her down the familiar path even as the air grew heavy with ash. The heat hit her like a wall as she descended into the canyon. Sweat instantly soaked through her clothes, and her eyes stung from the smoke. She pulled her shirt up over her nose, trying to filter the air as she pushed forward. Hello, is anyone here? She shouted, hoping to alert any of Harold's men who might still be around. But only the roar of flames answered her. The shed came into view through the haze. Already partially engulfed, Clara heard the frightened cries of the kittens inside, and her heart clenched. The mother Bobcat was nowhere in sight, likely forced to flee by the approaching flames. Without thinking about her own safety, Clara crashed through the weakened door. The interior was filling with smoke, making it almost impossible to see. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling forward as burning embers rained down around her. Where are you? She called out, coughing as the smoke filled her lungs. A weak mewing answered her from the corner. Through watering eyes, she made out 3 tiny forms huddled together. The roof groaned ominously above her. Clara lunged forward, gathering the kittens into her arms. They were terrified but too weak to struggle as she tucked them against her. CHESTA thunderous crack split the air. Clara looked up to see a burning beam falling directly toward her. She rolled to the side, protecting the kittens with her body as it crashed to the floor. Beside her, sending up a shower of sparks, Clara. A familiar voice cut through the roar of the flames. Royce's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the inferno outside. Get out, she screamed. The whole thing's coming down, clutching her precious cargo. Clara staggered to her feet and ran for the exit. The smoke was so thick now she could barely see where she was going. Her lungs burned with every breath. She burst out of the shed just as the roof collapsed behind her. Royce grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the falling debris. In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. The fire department's coming, Royce shouted over the chaos. And the state police. We got him, Clara. We got Harold. We got Harold. Through the smoke, Clara could see flashing lights at the top of the ravine. Julie had come through with the evidence, and the authorities had arrived just in time to catch Harold in the act. The kitten squirmed against her chest, still alive. Though frightened, Clara's eyes streamed tears from smoke or relief. She couldn't tell. Emergency vehicles were pouring into the area now, their lights cutting through the haze as firefighters deployed to battle the blaze. And there was Harold Sutter, his expensive suit covered in ash, being led away in handcuffs. His face was a mask of fury as he watched his plans literally go up in smoke. The recording devices Julie had helped them plant had caught everything. The deliberate setting of the fire, his orders to his men, all of it. Here, a paramedic approached Clara, holding out an oxygen mask. You need to get checked out. Smoke inhalation can be serious, but Clara's first concern was for the kittens. As the medical team examined them, she heard a familiar cry. The mother, Bobcat, had returned, watching anxiously from a safe distance as her babies were treated for smoke exposure. They're going to be okay, The wildlife expert on scene assured her. Thanks to you, they'll all be okay. Clara sat in the back of the ambulance, breathing deeply from the oxygen mask, watching as the firefighters brought the blaze under control. The ravine was scorched but not destroyed. Like the wildlife it sheltered, it would recover and grow stronger. In the weeks that followed Harold's arrest, Clara watched her world transform like the desert after rain. Workers removed the last traces of Harold's poisoned water sources, and fresh springs slowly returned to their natural state. The ravine began to heal, its delicate ecosystem recovering day by day. Clara's home, too, underwent restoration. With Royce's help, she repaired the damage from Harold's break-in, but made changes of her own. Her husband's old ranger photos still hung on the walls, but now they were joined by her own wildlife photographs. Each image told a story of survival and renewal. The young wildlife expert who had helped save the Bobcat kittens became a frequent visitor, teaching Clara about rehabilitation techniques. Together, they nursed the tiny family back to health in a specially designed enclosure. Clara watched them grow stronger, their wild spirit undiminished by their ordeal. They're ready, the expert announced one sunny morning, 3 months after the fire. Clara helped load the carrier into her truck, her heart both heavy and light as they drove to a remote section of the ravine. The release was simple and perfect. The mother bobcat emerged first, scanning the familiar territory. Her kittens followed, now nearly grown, their movements confident and sure. They disappeared into the brush without looking back, exactly as they should. But later that evening, as Clara stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the canyon walls, she spotted a familiar form on the opposite ridge. The bobcat mother sat perfectly still, her golden eyes meeting Clara's across the distance. No fear remained between them, only recognition. To survivors who had faced destruction and emerged stronger, Clara smiled, feeling the last weight of grief lift from her shoulders. She had protected this land not because it was what her husband would have done, but because it was what she needed to do. Her quiet life had transformed into something fierce and purposeful, as wild and true as the desert itself. The bobcat mother held her gaze for one more moment before melting away into the gathering dusk, leaving Clara standing tall in the growing darkness, finally and completely herself. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.